Welcome everybody once again, and without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Tanya Pimenov with Branksome Hall.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Tara, and for inviting me to be part of this webinar. And hello everyone. So today's objective is to talk about how we find content and how, with the assistance of my team, we decide on what alum story to use. I'll take you through the process from concept to printed magazine. Next slide. Let's start with a bit of background information about Branksome Hall. Branksome has been around for quite a long time, actually since 1903, which makes us 113 years old. This photo shows just one of the many heritage buildings we have on our 14-acre campus in the heart of Toronto. Branksome is Toronto's only all-girls, all-years international baccalaureate school from JK to grade 12. This year we have 905 students enrolled. 66 are boarders from 20 countries. We have 5,600 alumni with good mailing addresses, living in 65 countries worldwide. Next slide. The name of our magazine, The Read, is a play on words. Branksome's second principal was Miss Edith Read, same spelling incidentally, and she played an integral role in the growth of the school for 48 years, from 1910 to 1958. Two school landmarks also bear the Read name, so alumni of all ages can relate to this magazine. So how do we make it a great read? Well, our primary goal is to showcase our alumni. Branksome Hall attracts girls with great potential to succeed, so we must be sophisticated in content to reach former students as adults, and be sure that the content enhances the school's reputation. What you see on this slide is the look of our current magazine. Of course, it's evolved a great deal over the years, and actually began as an alum newsletter in 1960, featuring a few pages of class notes and recent marriages, births, and deaths. Back then, it was mailed to alumni who had paid their membership dues. Today, The Read is a 60-plus page glossy magazine, which is mailed to all alumni annually, and membership dues no longer exist. Also receiving the magazine are our parents, employees, past faculty, and friends. Copies of the magazine are placed in the admissions area of the school and given to prospective families. Next slide. Print is invaluable. It has real substance and strong reach with our alumni. Consider those alums who don't have email, or those who are uncomfortable with technology. In other words, they're not about to go on the website to connect with the school. They rely on print, and the Read is the main form of communication to keep them engaged. Print also cuts through the electronic congestion that people are experiencing these days. Stats from a recent survey have shown that 85% of alumni read all or most issues. 56 get all or most of their information about the school through the Read, and 36% rely solely on print communication. Next slide. So here's the Read team. That's me in the top photo. As editor, I consider myself the production manager as well. I work closely with our designer, who in person is not quite as ghost-like as he appears in the photo. Mike knows the school well, and we work well together. This is important because one issue takes 4 months to prepare. Designers do tend to have strong opinions, so you must be prepared occasionally for differences of opinion. For several years, I've been working with an editorial consultant who is a former journalist and editor. Burton, here in the bottom photo, writes several stories in each issue, edits all main stories, and provides eye-catching headlines and decks throughout the magazine. So how do we find content? Well, this falls under my portfolio, which is made easier, I think, because I'm also the Associate Director of Alumni Relations. I communicate with many alumni. I rely on LinkedIn, connect with alums on Facebook, and rely on current and past teachers and parents to alert me about an alum I may want to know more about. I listen for what is making news and what is trending. It really helps to be curious and inquisitive. It works to an editor's advantage. For example, when Canada was in the midst of a national election, I scouted out alumni in politics. When we ran an issue devoted to our health and wellness initiative, I found alumni in numerous wellness-related fields. What's really important is my dependence on and investment in good resources. You cannot go wrong if you invest in good writers. Writers who are comfortable interviewing and fact-checking and have experience in telling a good story. And investing in good photographers is also key. Our photographers always familiarize themselves with the alum's story first. It does have an impact on the photo, and as you'll see in the next few slides, the photo and headline set up the story. All right, what does determine good content? In the next few slides, I'll zoom in on what determines good content. I'll show how timeliness, newsworthiness, and societal trends have determined content in our past issues. Firstly, an example of timeliness. Here is Kate Middleton, about to leave for Canada in July 2011. As editor, I try to catch a story while it's a hot topic. Next slide. And this was a very hot topic. What followed was a stunning 3-page spread featuring the 2 alumni in this slide, whose website crashed and whose sales skyrocketed on that July morning when Kate Middleton wore that blue blazer. These alumni were the duo behind the success of the Smythe label. I contacted them within the hour of the news breaking on social media. Then I found the writer, a young alum who covered fashion and design for the Globe and Mail. We used a stock photo, and the story of their success ran in the fall 2011 issue. That's the importance of social media and staying on top of hot and timely topics. Next slide. Newsworthiness makes for great content. Everyone is familiar with these 2 topics. In vitro fertilization affects many couples, especially these days as women, for whatever reason, may put off having a baby. And whether provincial plans should cover the expensive procedure has been broadly debated. Organ donation, well, for all of you who have a driver's license, you know how sensitive this topic can be, and most likely not one discussed around the dining room table. All the more reason to focus in on this topic. Next slide. And here's what followed. The article, Making Babies, was in our most recent issue. And in order to find Dr. Allison Case, who you see here, I had to do some major snooping. It came about in a roundabout way. Upon hearing that the 2016 CCAE conference would be held in Saskatoon, I decided to see what alums lived there. Dr. Allison Case came up, but I had no direct contact information for her. From the IVF Clinic's website, I was soon speaking to the nurse receptionist, explaining to her why I wanted to reach Dr. Case. She was so excited about the prospect and located Dr. Case, who was vacationing at the time. Within hours, Dr. Case got back to me and the article became a reality. And yes, I did attend the conference and enjoyed a lovely dinner with Dr. Case. A little research certainly goes a long way. Cri de Coeur is the story about Sarah Taylor, whose husband desperately needed a lung transplant. I found out about Sarah's work as an organ donor advocate via another alum. It was a dramatic story about life and death. We needed to tell this story in a compassionate manner, and the photography needed to capture the love between Sarah and Keith. Sarah's hard work to raise awareness about organ donation paid off. Ontario has seen a dramatic increase in registrations. It certainly convinced me to register. So from these two stories, you can see the importance of keeping up to date on news and big topics that you can align with alumni stories. Being inquisitive and a bit of a snoop also helps. Next slide. This brings me to the story that made our cover in the last issue. Societal trends can shift one's way of thinking and explain why people behave the way they do. Next slide. What followed was our latest issue on being transgender. Here's a look into how two stories about two changed lives unfolded and the impact it had even beyond our school community. In 2014, Reed, who you see on the left, arrived back at the school for his 10th reunion, where he was welcomed by student volunteer greeters. One of these students was the head of the Gay Straight Alliance, a group that involved a number of Toronto independent schools. It was at this juncture that I became involved. I emailed Reed with two specific questions. Could the GSA reach out to him, and would he be interested in writing his own story for our magazine? You see, I knew Reed could write, as it had been recorded in our database that he had received a scholarship for creative writing. Meanwhile, in a very serendipitous moment, our principal told me she had been shopping in a local grocery store and had run into a past parent. She soon learned that her son, Andy, who you see on the right, also had transitioned, and that Andy was Reed's classmate. I proceeded to contact Andy, and he, now a busy lawyer, agreed to be interviewed. As the magazine began to take shape, my team wanted Reed and Andy on the cover, but we were concerned the story may be relegated to the inside status. It led to discussion, and the school's leadership decided that yes, putting these two grads on the cover was the right thing to do. The magazine dropped in early January. What was important here was the importance of institutional courage. Take risks and be willing to be bold. The payoff can be huge. Next slide. The media flurry that occurred almost immediately after the magazine was mailed was unprecedented. It generated positive coverage in news outlets from the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Now Magazine, and several others. In the days that followed, the Toronto Star ran a story on the boys of Branksome. Supportive comments from alumni and parents by email and phone were all positive in tone, with comments such as bravo, awesome, and proud of my school. Our flip book shot up to 5,700 views in January alone. The annual fund exceeded the overall goal, and among alumni, we achieved 2 percentage points over our goal. I like to think that the pride our alums felt in their magazine and their school had something to do with increased participation in our annual fund. Next slide. So, just to leave you with some key takeaways. Go about your next issue knowing that magazines are, for sure, the ultimate relationship builder. Check out what's in the news, be flexible, and if it's timely, use it. Be bold. A magazine should get people talking. Stay connected to your alums and showcase your alums in all stages of life. Provide a mix of stories. Partner with great writers and photographers, and make sure you have eye-catching headlines and decks. And lastly, next slide, build on your magazine. Much as one's Thanksgiving turkey might continue to appear in a soup or casserole, think of how you can repurpose your magazine. As Jason Miller, the content guru at LinkedIn says, repurpose your good work and give it a longer life. Put your alumni profiles on the website. At photo shoots, take a short video of an alum you're profiling and use it as a teaser before the magazine drops. Talk up your publication, as I am today in this webinar. Well, that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I hope you have found some of the tips useful. Now, I'd like to turn things over to Lisa Cook, who is the Associate Director of Communications in Advancement Communications at the University of Alberta.
Thanks, Tanya. That was some really good stuff you had there, and you're going to hear some of it echoed in my presentation as well. So as Tanya said, my name is Lisa Cook. I'm Associate Director of Communications in the Office of Advancement at the U of A. I'm also Editor-in-Chief of New Trail, which is U Alberta's alumni magazine, and Cornerstone, which is a donor magazine. So the topic of today's session is why print still matters, and since Tanya focused on finding great content, I will talk a bit about how to present that content in creative ways that reinforce the power of print. But before we go any further, I need to tell you, I'm not an impartial presenter. Next slide. I love magazines. I've loved magazines since my mom first got me subscription to OWL back in the 1970s. I would come home from school, I'd find it in the mailbox. I was so excited I'd race right to my room and read it cover to cover. So believe me when I tell you I have a bias for print. I also firmly believe our university magazines can still create that OWL magazine level of excitement in our readers. Next slide. But I understand that my passion for print won't help you when you're, say, in a budget meeting and someone asks, how much do we pay to print and mail the alumni magazine? Or even worse, can't we just email them a PDF version? Did anyone else's heart stop for a second? But the fact is, those are very valid questions. It's a tough climate for print right now. I'm going to guess, though, that you believe print is right for your publication, and that's why you're here today. So this is why Tanya and I want to give you the information you need to advocate for print and get excited about it. Next slide. Here's how I'm going to help you walk into that next budget meeting feeling 100% confident about the value of your print product. First, I will prove that many of your readers still want to hear from you the snail mail way, and why that print product might actually be more effective at delivering your message than sharing the same story online. Then I'm going to suggest ways you can take full advantage of the print format. Third, I'll share with you the secret to working some great eye-catching content into your publication, even if you're a one-person shop, and I'll share some of the magazines that inspire us. Finally, I'll give you some next steps for how to execute great print-first pieces. One note, I'm going to be talking mostly about magazines today, but a lot of what you learn here should translate to other kinds of publications. Next slide. So as I said earlier, I'm Editor-in-Chief of 2 U Alberta magazines, Cornerstone and New Trail. The main distribution for both of these publications is print, because that's the best way for us to get noticed. Don't get me wrong, we have digital properties too. You need to have an online presence as well. But our readers are busy, and we need something to compete with the daily noise and the overflowing inbox, or as Tanya put it so well, the electronic congestion. Next. Some of you might already be familiar with Penelope Burke, president of Cygnus Applied Research. Her books are basically Bibles in fundraising and stewardship. In her most recent Burke donor survey, she talked about this print effect. As fewer things are coming in the mail, direct mail and print have more cachet and will get noticed. Next slide. But don't take my word for it, or even Penelope. Here are a few numbers from Magazines Canada. As you can see, people just straight up prefer to read things in print, a whopping 71% in fact. They like the fact that they can carry it around. They like to actually touch it. They even find it easier to read. And guess what? The battery never dies on a print product. Next slide. Because after all, you don't want to just pass information along to your readers. You want to create a relationship with them. You need to engage your readers. And print is the most engaging medium. It's like building any relationship. First, you have to catch their interest. Yeah, it's going to be a little superficial at this point, but hey, you can't help it if you've got a good-looking cover. Then you start to entertain them. You educate them, tell them things they didn't know before, things they didn't even know they wanted to know. You draw them into a conversation and keep them interested. Soon, They start telling their friends about you. They look forward to seeing you again. Next slide. Before you know it, they begin to believe in you. This is perhaps the most important step in any relationship. Once you create trust, you've formed a serious commitment. Once you create trust, your reader is ready to take it to the next level. And when you have reader trust, you've created an entryway for the rest of the university. They might open that alumni email they wouldn't have before. They might go out of their way to keep their contact info up to date. They'll begin to advocate for you. They're more open to volunteering and ultimately supporting you financially. Just to be clear here, I don't think your alumni magazine is the place to ask people for money. In fact, our research showed that placing asks in our alumni magazine actually breaks that trust bond. But the alumni magazine is the place to show your reader her values align with your values. Then when the time comes that she's ready to put money into those things she believes in, you've made sure your university is in the running for that donation. Next slide. Okay, so what about younger readers? Common wisdom will tell you younger readers want to, but you shouldn't believe everything you hear. Don't believe me? Just ask Penelope. So it's not just old people who like print. Young people like it too. Imagine you're 18. How many times have you received something addressed to you in the mail? Not very many. Next slide. In a student survey conducted by Academica Group, 3/4 of students found a viewbook more helpful in choosing a school than the website. And when it came time to close the deal, they wanted to get even more personal. They preferred to engage face-to-face with university reps. And yeah, I totally used a waving baby panda here. I'm not afraid to be shameless. Next slide. Finally, it's important, of course, to understand who your readers are. This is the data that will really tell you whether print is the best medium for your product. I highly recommend reader surveys. Not only does it allow you to show the value of print, it also lets you drill down, get reaction on specific stories or sections of the magazine. As you can see here, we did a reader survey in 2010, and this confirmed our belief that readers still wanted print. It's hard to see that little dot there right now, but 59% of our readers at that time said they preferred print. Next slide. The survey was foundational for us at New Trail. At this point, our leadership made a very conscious decision to invest in the magazine. We began to put more resources into great art, captivating design. We upped the quality of our writing. We made sure we were telling the stories our readers wanted to hear, not just the ones we wanted to tell. We believed this investment would pay off in the long term. And next slide. It's paid off. Recently, New Trail started doing post-issue surveys. And after our first two, it looks like readers are even more passionate about print now than they were back in 2010. We think this growth is related to that investment we put into the quality of the magazine. We offer a product the reader finds valuable. In other words, we built up their trust. That's just a key factor in how alumni interact with us later in their lives. It's also important to be consistently awesome. Even after you build up that trust, it's just so easy to shatter it. It only takes 1 or 2 missteps. Being able to put data like this up on the screen is so valuable for you when you need to advocate for more resources, or even sometimes you just have to argue for not reducing existing resources. One note about surveys, if you want to do one, we found it a bit tough to get going, so if anybody wants some help, feel free to contact me after this presentation. Next slide. Okay, so at last you've convinced your leadership print is still worth investing in. You honed your message, you perfected your stories, your art is on point, your class notes sing, and then you send that perfect little miracle off into the real world. What happens? We know people are busy. We have to compete for their attention. Take your average working mom. I like to say we have about 30 seconds, the time it takes her to get from the front door to the blue bin, to convince her our magazine is of value. If she doesn't open us up in those 30 seconds, we're going to be tossed in with the junk mail and the recycled cereal boxes. Next slide. So that's why beyond just giving you some stats, I want to offer some tips on how to get maximum bang for your print budget. The truth is, as post-secondary institutions, many of us still have a print budget. That can be a luxury in today's business world. Frankly, it's also a really good opportunity to stand out. But for most of us, this is public money we're using, and we need to honor that as well. We need arresting content to make sure we get eyes on our message. So here are some of the things we focus on to try to catch our readers before they relegate all of our hard work to the recycle bin. I think it's important here to also point out what is not on this list: your university priorities. Don't get me wrong, I know you're communicators and these are super important to you. But the truth is, most readers just don't care about your new institutional plan. If you want your reader to open you up, you have to make sure you're providing stories they want to hear, that offer them value. Of course, there are ways to turn your university priorities into stories that are interesting and eye-catching. And they surprise you sometimes and turn out pretty darn good. But I need to tell you right now, the second you start to tell the stories that you want people to know, instead of telling the reader what they're interested in, you've lost them, and for longer than just one issue. All right, lecture over. Speaking of grabbing the reader's attention, let's give a tip of the hat to the cover. Next slide. Creating a great cover is an art and a science. It's a mystical experience all combined into one. It not only tempts your reader to open the magazine, it also lets the reader know in one glance who you are and what you stand for. Creating the perfect cover, frankly, it could fill 10 webinars. So instead, I'm just going to leave you with these thoughts from D.W. Pine of Time. He points out that you have to penetrate the cluttered media landscape, grab people's attention, and make them think. Mission accomplished, D.W. Of course, there's so much to do beyond the cover to catch your reader. And if there's one piece of advice I can offer today, it's this. Next slide. Steal this magazine. Or, more precisely, steal this magazine's ideas. Consumer mags are overflowing with captivating, cool, creative approaches to sharing information. Most of these approaches are very literally made for print. These are things that just often don't work as well online. Next slide. You can see an example of what I'm talking about. We call this packaging. The idea is to put across information in a way that catches the reader's attention and makes the information easy to digest. Make it inviting. Next slide. Okay, I'm not saying that long-form stories shouldn't be part of your mix. Hey, some of my favorite magazines do long-form. It's a very powerful vehicle, but narrative is only one of the many tools in your magazine toolbox. Next slide. Presenting stories in different ways, especially in your front of book or back of book sections, that gives your readers a tasty selection. You're making sure there's something that will draw him or her in. Now, I'm obviously not encouraging you to steal ideas, but the big budget from the big budget
doing this webinar thing that should really be heard.
Sorry, there's someone else on the line. But the big budget consumer mags are a great place to find that spark of inspiration. Don't try to reinvent the wheel every time. Just go out there and take the wheel someone else has already perfected, slap it onto your communications vehicle. When you see something in another magazine that catches your eye, tear it out and pop it into an ideas binder. Next time you're stuck on how to tell a story, just flip through that binder and you're sure to find some inspiration. Next slide. These are some of the consumer magazines we always have on hand. Smithsonian, Scientific American, Mental Floss is great. I love Mental Floss. Pacific Standard, Time, and the New York Times Magazine, of course. Popular Mechanics and Popular Science might surprise you. If you haven't checked those out in the last few years, they've had a really good redesign, and especially their front of book sections are worth getting inspiration from. Next slide. So if you feel bad about stealing ideas from the big budget, well-staffed glossies, let me assure you, everybody does it. On the left, you'll see a recent issue of Mental Floss. On the right, this is this magazine from a few years back. Everybody gets inspiration from somewhere. Next slide. So now I'm going to give you a few ideas about packages that you can use in your magazines. These are ideas you can start copying in your very next issue, and they're probably also the easiest ones for small shops to tackle. First is the 3 things story. That's what we call it. This is like the younger, cooler cousin to the traditional Q&A. Why not eliminate the Q and cut straight to the take-home points? Or put up 3 things your alumna learned when she was an investment banker. Or if you have a book from an alumnus, what are the 3 take-home points from that book? It can be 5 things or 10 things, whatever you want. I really like this approach for when you have to profile someone from the university, maybe someone you think your readers might not be that interested in. For example, people might not want to dive into a 500-word story on the new provost, but they will probably at least skim a 3 things piece, especially if there's a really good photo. Next slide. Next up, say it with pictures. Often our team falls into the writer's trap. We think we have to say it to communicate it, but a great photo tells the story all by itself. Don't be afraid to trim back the text, give the art a full page or a full 2-page spread. Pictures are a great way to tap into nostalgia, campus connection. You could show the impact of research through pictures, or in this case, a refreshing way to profile a donor. This was part of a profile that ran in Cornerstone, proving that donor stories do not have to be boring. Next slide. Service stories. These offer your readers really good value. They're the ones that readers will clip and save for years to come. Any list you can pull together that combines numbers and the words how to, that's editorial gold. Tap into your alumni or university expertise. Service stories are everywhere once you start looking. Next up, I call this illustrated essentials. I'm not sure how else to describe it. Basically, it's essentially pulling out your main points and combining it with an illustration or photo. It's a great way to handle timelines or to simplify complex issues. One challenge, these pieces require trimming your story. You have to get down to the bare essentials, and that can be a really tough exercise. Another example on the next slide. On the left, we have infographics. Data is really powerful, and well-presented data can be fascinating. Just ask all of those people walking around wearing Fitbits. Great infographics. They don't just showcase numbers, they also tell a story, as you see in this example. On the right, we have decision trees. These are really good options for sidebars. They also work well as standalones. They're a lot of fun, and they're interactive, not something you hear a lot when you're talking about print. Next slide. So once you get into the habit of packaging stories, you'll start to come up with your own styles. Our most recent issue of New Trail included a couple that I think are really good examples. The one you see here came from a profile of a U Alberta professor emeritus and a CanLit legend named Rudy Wiebe. The freelancer who wrote the piece, he was also a student in Wiebe's class back once upon a time. And in his story, he talked about how terrifying it was to be edited by Wiebe, who is a Governor General Award winner. So we thought, let's represent this experience for the reader. We asked Wiebe to annotate the final piece. Then we included those annotations, proofer style, in the magazine. The execution of this idea was a lot more work than we thought. It involved multiple trips to Rudy Wiebe's house. We had a Sharpie budget, and if you can believe it, we actually had handwriting auditions. But when the magazine hit mailboxes, we got an overwhelming number of positive comments. The nice thing about this piece too is it doesn't translate as well online. This one is made for print. Next slide. We also got a lot of really good feedback on this feature. The idea here was to showcase the value of an arts degree, so we highlighted the different kinds of careers available to BAs. The result was our very own U Alberta-centric Choose Your Own Adventure novel. We made it as a pull-out booklet, complete with fun illustrations, forks in the road. We even threw in a few wacky endings. This one too ended up being way more work than we thought in the beginning, but it was a lot of fun. And it got people talking about New Trail, especially on social media. Next slide. Okay, hopefully you saw something that inspired you in those examples. but how do you actually make it happen? Don't worry, I won't leave you stranded. Here are a few tips on getting it done. So as you heard me talk about, implementing these pieces can be really time-consuming. So plan early. One of the things we use for planning is a flat plan, as you can see here. It's basically just an Excel spreadsheet. We pace out our stories. We have about 16 pages for our front of book, 16 for our back of book section, and the feature well varies from issue to issue. When you're planning for stories that you're going to apply packaging to, leave yourself time and don't assume that you're going to get it for the coming issue. Pick an evergreen story, something that won't feel old if you have to hold it. Okay, next slide. Find an example in one of the many magazines you now subscribe to. Pin it up beside your desk. You might not have a story to go with it yet, but at some point you're going to look at that page and you're going to say, aha, I can totally use that approach with our story on, next slide, for example, the future. Before you do anything else, pick up your phone and talk to your designer. In-house or contract, it shouldn't matter. Bring your example, bring your idea, and talk with your designer about what you need to do to execute your vision. This step comes first because you have to know how the story will look on the page before you assign it. And what was it that Tanya said? Designers have strong opinions. So you need to have time for some of that conversation back and forth. Believe me, you don't want to assign a story first, get a 1,000-word story, and then try to trim it to this length. The piece you see here was part of our Future of Everything issue. It stemmed from a 20-minute presentation given by an alumna. Trying to trim it down to what you see here was brutal. So I would say in this case, we probably had about 5 different drafts before we hit it. Next slide. Finally, I know many of you have small shops, so here's what I suggest. Pick one of your stories to use as a trial balloon. Try a smaller story in your front of book news section, see how that one piece goes, and build on what you learned. Then maximize your effort by templating a piece that appears in every issue. For example, you could always have 3 questions on page 4, or you could always include an infographic on your last page. Before long, you'll be packaging like an expert. All right, next slide. I hope I've armed you today with not just why print matters, but how to execute great print-specific content. It is hard work, takes extra time and resources, but it will get easier. And as you collect that data through reader surveys and alumni start stopping your AVP at events to tell him how much they love your magazine, that's when you can start to make the argument for more resources down the line. Plus, it's a lot of fun, almost as fun as a baby panda. Thanks very much for listening, guys.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everybody, for being here. We've got some time for questions. I'm going to unmute your line.
The conference has been unmuted.
So all of your lines are unmuted. So if there are any questions, you can feel free to ask them now. And if you have any questions as well, you can put them through the chat box.
I'm going to hang up on that because there's nothing in there that...
Do we have any questions that have come out from anybody? I did have one in the chat box that was for Tanya. Tanya, you're still on the line. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Great. There was a question in regard to some of the folks that you had inquired to help write the stories. Did they do that on a volunteer basis, or were they sort of contracted for payment?
It's sort of like a case-by-case situation. We do prefer to pay our writers because then it's taken a little bit more seriously and they work to the timelines that I need. So basically, I'd say most of the writing is paid writing, and it's professional writers as best as we can. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. Lisa, do you want to field that for a moment as well while we have the time?
Sure, yeah, we also pay our freelancers. As Tanya said, not only do you get a better product, but you know you're going to get it on time. And she also said in her presentation, she talked about having really high quality writing. If you're just asking, say, a student or an alumna who might not have the experience or background to start writing a story, you you're going to spend a lot of time editing to get it to where you want. It might not be worth the cost that you paid in the end.
Great. Thank you both. I do have another question in the box. It is, are either of you using advertising or sponsorship to assist with the cost of your publication? So Tanya, do you want to go ahead first?
Sure. No, we don't do any advertising. We tried it. We dabbled with advertising a number of years ago, and it became a very big job. And because we're such a small shop, it was not felt, the effort was not paying off really. And also it became a question about what the ad was about. Like in one case somebody wanted to advertise acne medicine or something, and we had this photo of a before and after, and we felt it really wasn't suitable for the magazine. So we have stopped advertising altogether. We do only in-house ads, so we would advertise our day camps. We would advertise the new venue, the AWC for athletics and for fitness classes and so forth, but no paid advertising in our publication.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. Lisa?
Yeah, we do accept paid advertising. We at one point had a staffer who about a third of her job was to get advertising for the magazine. And when we had someone dedicated to that task, we actually covered about a third of the cost of the magazine. It was definitely something that was worthwhile. Because of a shift in that position, we no longer have that position, so we aren't supporting as much of the magazine. We're just renewing ads. We're not going out and chasing them. So as Tanya mentioned, you definitely need someone dedicated to it. It's not something that you can do off the side of your desk and do it well enough to support the whole magazine. One thing that we do, we have in-house ads as well, and that's where we put our asks, our financial asks, and where we thank donors. So I talked a little bit about that trust bond by letting the reader know that our asks are advertisements. It's a way to let them know that the editorial content is not going to be an ask. They can trust what they're reading from us, and then they know that the university, any sort of financial requests or thanking of donors happens in the ads. And just to talk about what Tanya mentioned here about, sometimes you get advertisers that might not align with your values. We ended up having to put together ad guidelines. So that way we had a document we could point to say, I'm sorry, we won't take that advertisement. It doesn't align with what the university believes in.
Can I just add to that what we do? If an alum, for example, is starting out a new business, and I've got an example, one of our young alums is now, her dog walking service has really taken off. So I wouldn't put an ad in, but I would tell her that I would mention this in the class notes section, and happy to give her, put her website down there. So that's the way we sort of get around it if an alum really wants to reach out, and it adds to the class notes, interest in class notes. So that's how we handle it.
Great. Thank you both. Do we have any other questions? Verbally, your lines are unmuted. And if you do have a question you'd like to pose on the more anonymous side, you can feel free to use your chat box.
Hi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
It's a question for both Tanya and Lisa. Some university administrators can be a little on the conservative side. So I'm just wondering for Tanya whether that was an issue at all, for instance, for your piece on the two transgender graduates. And also, Lisa, in terms of kind of your colorful approach to some stories, I wonder if you ever come across an administrator who will say, well, that's a fun spread on the future, but really can't we use those pages to tell people about our strategic academic priority plan?
You've been in my meetings, haven't you? Tanya, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, definitely this issue on being transgender did initiate a little bit more conversation than past reads. And there was absolutely no question about having Read. It's the same name, so it gets confusing. But Read Tell His Story. A few years ago, we had done an issue or an article on an alum who was a lesbian, and that was the first time we had a profile on a lesbian. And it was not a cover story, but it was inside the magazine. And we didn't know at first that we were going to put the two boys on the cover. But once I read Reed's article and saw how beautifully it was written, how compassionately he was speaking about the transition he went through, and it was not sensationalizing at all, because that was one of the issues that I was most concerned about, and I know Andy also, the lawyer, he was concerned that this was not to sensationalize. It was just to tell the story to the alumni community and Branksome community about the realities that are happening now in people's lives. So when we got both of them out for the photo shoot together, and we were seeing how powerful that could be with the two of them on the cover, that was when we had the initial discussion, and we basically said to the leadership team that, we can't put an article of this quality or two articles of this quality with the photo inside the magazine. That would be sending the wrong message, to our community, that we want to talk about it, but we're putting it in the inside. So it really was a no-brainer. They totally understood this plan of action and wholeheartly agreed to this bold move, and we were thrilled with it. One thing was, before it was distributed, the principal wanted our board members to receive the magazine first, and she delivered it, I think, that evening at the board meeting, and she couldn't even get the board meeting going because everybody had their noses in the magazine. Everybody was very proud of the school for doing that. So yeah, no, you are met occasionally with questionable covers. A few years ago, I did a cover of a dancer who was in very, very skimpy outfit with fishnet stockings and so forth. But it was a magazine about the arts, and it was a stunning magazine with a black background. So few people raised their eyebrows on that, but I really feel, the school has come an awfully long way. I think a lot of institutions have come an awfully long way. And yeah, so there you go. I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you.
We do have, sorry, Lisa, do you want to go ahead quickly, and then we have two questions in the queue.
Okay, sure. I'll just try to address it really quickly. We have really, as you noted, upped our splashiness, I guess, for any other word, and that has been very iterative. As I said in my presentation, we started in 2010 with this intent to up the magazine to get it to kind of a consumer quality look. And what you see in the magazine today is not something we could have done in 2010. We had to get leadership on board. We had to partner with our bosses and really talk through every story. And as we saw more success through reader surveys, and as we had more alumni coming up to our AVP and saying, oh my God, I really loved that story, we gained their trust. So it's been about a 6-year process.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys. We do have 3 questions in the queue, so we'll get through them as quick as possible. Erin, are you still here, and did you still want to post? If you are distributing once a year, what is the ideal timing?
Okay, so we're the once-a-year people here at Branksome. The best time that we've found actually is the time that we're doing it. So during the fall months is when I'm capturing all the information of recent events, things that happened, like our May reunion. It also is a quieter time a little bit at the school so that I can focus on it, because I'm also the Associate Director of Alumni Relations. So, I sort of have several feathers in my cap. No, that's the wrong expression. Anyway, I basically turn a lot of my attention to the read right now, like between August and December. after the Christmas rush, we don't want to put mail in December, for example. So January is sort of a downtime. It's dark out. People get their magazine. They can bury into it. But if we are to go to 2 issues, and certainly we've had this discussion again to go back to 2 issues a year, we would most likely do this in the fall and spring.
Great.
We do 3 issues. I don't know if it's helpful. We time it. We have one in the fall to get people excited about our alumni weekend. So we come out about a month before the alumni weekend. And we have our winter one come out just before the end of the year. That's for those advertisers who are asking for donations. We want to catch people before the end of the fiscal. And then in January, or we come out in the spring. I'm not sure that there's a really good timing for that issue other than it just falls well with the other 2.
Great. And what technology are you using to present your magazine online? Is it Flipbook or something else?
Yeah, Branksome uses Uberflip.
This is Lisa here, New Trail. We do put it up on Issue, but we don't send that out to readers. We have a website where we load the stories, and then we do have about 500 digital subscribers. So we send them an email with it's almost like a mini table of contents. We're like, here's the contents of this month's issue, and then the links lead them to the direct stories.
Great. Erin is going to be sending me her question through the chat box. But while we have a few moments left, are there any other questions from the folks who are still on the line?
Can I just add something, Tara? It's Tanya, about the Uberflip. What the beauty of that is that we do a lot of links in the Uberflip. So we link to websites, we link to longer stories, we link to various things. So that is just an added feature of going electronic. The only thing we don't put class notes, and we don't put passages on the Uberflip, on the flipbook.
Perfect. I was able to get the question up. This one's directed to Lisa, and then we can have Tanya field it. If anything, how have some of the print-friendly packages translated to digital and social sharing?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's something we're struggling with. We recently, within the last year, had a new position within our Greater Advancement Communications Office. He's a little more savvy. He's got more experience and background in trying to take some of these print things and break them up and make them a little more interactive. For example, if you think of an infographic, sometimes you see these great infographics online and I say, I want that, but we haven't been able to get it up until now. So we've just put the PDF up online, and it just doesn't have the power. So it's something we're working on. The other thing we're struggling with is I'm going to use the wrong words, but the platform that our website is on doesn't always allow some of the great bells and whistles you see on other websites, like the New York Times Snowfall. We can't quite get there yet, but eventually I would like to be able to pull apart some of these print-specific packages and make them really shine online. It goes back to repurposing that content, right? So not yet, but hopefully.
Great. Tanya, did you want to maybe add anything? Because you did talk about repurposing that turkey. So
I know. Well, that's something we're doing parts of that right now. We're not doing it completely. At the last shoot I was at, I took my trusty camera with me and did some videotaping of the shoot. And these are going to be little teasers that we can send out electronically. We do send out an electronic newsletter about 6 times a year and have about 45% open rate. But that means that there's still a lot of people that don't open it. And so yeah, we hopefully going to start doing that. And again, tracking things. The survey indicated that the read was well read, and basically, if it's received as a magazine, I don't believe a lot of people are going on to look at it. Generally, flip books are showing about a 500 people readership, except for the last issue. It completely shot up to almost 6,000.
Wow, that's great.
Perfect. So last question that I've got, and you are free to share or not share, is if you are able to, can you share an idea, if not the exact, cost per unit for the magazine or distribution?
Ours probably, we have 160,000 alumni that we mail to, and I'm just going off the top of my head, but I think for printing it's about $70,000 per issue. So as I say, it's something that we've made an intentional investment into. And then, sorry, I'm just going off the top of my head, but so that the printing is our biggest cost. If someone wants to email me after, I'd be happy to talk through the fuller cost of the magazine.
Yeah, I think I would imagine that ours is higher per issue because we only have 7,000, I think 7,200 printed. A lot of the magazines we keep here at the school for distribution for admissions and prospective families, but the actual mailing is just under 7,000. I have a budget of 48,000 to produce the magazine, and a big chunk of that actually does go to the mailing cost. Because it's crazy how expensive it is now to mail it out. It's definitely not cheap, but the returns on a print magazine are invaluable, and right. It's a one. Yep. Okay.
That's why you have to have that data to prove that it's worth it, right? Oh, and I also wanted. Yep. Sorry, I also wanted to add that we break down. So when we are talking to our leadership, we also break down the cost. So per issue per alumnus, so every issue we send out, it's about $1.65 per alumnus per issue. So when we put it that way, it seems like a pretty good bang for your buck.
Great. So that brings us almost to the hour, and there are no questions left in the queue, so I think we got them all. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking the opportunity to rely a little bit more on Tanya and Lisa's expertise. Thank you for putting together such great presentations. The participation has been great as well. So as I said, if you would like a copy of this presentation, you simply just need to email us and we'll be able to get that out for you. And without further ado, thank you guys very much and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.